Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. I wanted this picture to linger for a moment. I wanted this to sit, because I want this to settle. I want this to settle somewhere where it's understood, it's flesh to bone. And I know people may have this idea of tragedy, atrocity. Maybe atrocity is too strong. Tragedy, definitely. The picture I was going to use for this was much more dramatic and much more painful, but I like this picture a little bit better. This is the man himself, Julian Assange. Julian Assange gets a certain amount of notoriety for the information that was released, and I've done videos on that information and everything else. I'm not going to fully go there. I think most people know who he is at this point. He has been sitting in an Ecuadorian in an Ecuadorian embassy in the UK, stuck there because he's terrified that there is a warrant hiding behind this warrant for the UK that would get him extradited to the United States. He's not a citizen of the United States, and yet he is potentially going to be extradited to the US for releasing information that the United States does not necessarily like him releasing. Going for the operations, essentially waste, fraud, and abuse. It embarrasses people in power, and those people in power want to hit back. Now, Julian Assange, being in the Ecuadorian embassy, has had a certain amount of protection from Ecuador, the Ecuadorian president, the last Ecuadorian president. Well, that Ecuadorian president is now upon charges, magnificently or magically, and the new president has started to forge closer relationships with the United States and with the UK. One of the rocks in the shoe, to take a phrase from the current president, I think it's Correa. Moreno is the new one. Yeah, Correa. The rocks in the shoe. Julian Assange. They want to get rid of Assange out that embassy. But seeing as they're giving him a certain amount of diplomatic immunity, that is a pain in the ass to do from a legal standpoint. That said, it may happen. They've been in talks. The Ecuadorian government, the president, or the Ecuadorian government has been in talks trying to figure out how to mend the relationship and get closer to the United States and relationship with the UK. One of the ways, of course, and the bargaining chips in this is Julian Assange. Now, reports for the past few weeks have been coming out saying that they have been in talks, Julian Assange, or you can say the Ecuadorian government, with the United States and the UK. And we were able to see the United States flex its muscles recently when Ecuador wanted to put in, I guess it was some kind of, it's not an amendment, but they wanted to put something through, I can't think of the name of it, but into like the UN Charter that will say that breast milk is more nutritious and healthier, which is true. With the United States putting its thumb, threatening Ecuador in order to withdraw that because they wanted to fight for essentially the formula companies who didn't want them to put that in. I got across this idea in a kind of tangential way with the force and the pressure that's being applied upon Ecuador, probably behind the scenes, and in this case, out in the open. WikiLeaks released this. Editor-in-Chief of RT, my sources tell me that Julian Assange will be handed over to the UK in the next weeks or days. Like never before, I wish that my sources are wrong. And I don't speak or read Russian, so there's no point. But at the very least, if you do, you can interrogate the source yourself. This is not, with the NOT, inconsistent from the stuff that was coming up in the various articles in the various media that's been covering that's the meetings or the conversations that have been reported on taking place between Ecuador and the US. Jesus Christ. So, there's not really much on this. There's not even much to really say about this. I was disheartened, and maybe even to some degree myself on this, where I remember Kelly. Kelly went to I think it was a meeting for Assange, I think in D.C. And she was talking about this kind of paltry group of people who came to give support. There were a few YouTubers and there were a few people I think who were there, but she was like, God, there's hardly nobody here, and it gets across this idea of the public not fully being aware of the gravity of what's about to take place if he's just handed over in this way. What does diplomatic immunity mean if you just strip it away? When the next government or president or whoever takes over gets in office, there's also something to be said about the ripping and shredding of Ecuadorian sovereignty when this particular Ecuadorian administration is willing to essentially bend the knee to U.S. interests, allowing themselves once again sovereignty by a foreign power of the United States and the UK. The previous president wasn't on board for that. This one is. So I'm going to end this here because there's not much on this bone, but I will show this one again just so people know and understand. Editor-in-Chief, my sources tell me that Julian Assange will be handed over to the UK in the next weeks or days. Like never before, I wish my sources were wrong. That's not a good thing. That's a tragedy, which is why I had my other tragedy image up. All right, guys.